Hello there, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about Pat Garret and Billy the Kid, which as you see is a Criterion edition I've got. This is the one with 4K cuts. So you have the 50th anniversary edition, you have the theatrical cut, and you have the final preview cut. Now the final preview cut is the edition that was sneaked out of the editing room after Peckinpah had been fired from the film. So that was the cut that he'd finished, that he'd actually got as close to completion as possible before he was fired, and then someone else came in and recut it. And it was placed in a vault and it was left until it was released years later in Turner Classics. There were quite a few editions of this, so it's hard to tell which one is They say this one is slightly different from the one that was the Turner Classic one, but it's the variations really. But Pat Garret and Billy the Kid was one of those Peckinpah films that went through hell to get a release. It was the kind of his last big grasp of being like an important director in cinema. Following this, he made other films, but none of them had the same impact as what he'd been doing before then. This was kind of his big last hurrah. And to be honest, this is my favourite Peckinpah film. And it's definitely one of my favourite films overall. I've been waiting for this for years. Before, you used to have an edition, a DVD edition, which was, you'd get the 40th reconstruction edition, or 35th anniversary reconstruction edition, which was done in a lower budget and wasn't really they weren't very happy with it, is the best way to put it. And I wasn't very happy with it as a fan of the film, because it felt like it wasn't quite like a Peckinpah film. It felt like it wasn't finished, and I just went back to the Turner Cut edition because it was a much better, more complete film. This new edit is actually much closer to the Turner edition, but with like certain things pruned down a little bit, the way that the plot would have been pruned down if Peckinpah had a chance to finish his film. It's just that thing of you're just going by his notes and what the editors knew, what he wanted to do with the film. So it was that thing of trying to take what was a preview cut and just get it down a bit more to what would have been a release cut. So you have this 50th anniversary cut, you've got the 35th anniversary cut, you have a theatrical cut, you have a Turner edition, and you have this other preview cut. So there's 5 cuts of the film available. And they're sort of based essentially the same film. It's not like it's like a massively different film. It's just like it's what they focus on. And the theatrical release, they focus on the plot more. On the longer editions, they focus on atmosphere mixed with the plot, which is the more successful edition because it's more about character and more about what all the actions mean to the people involved. And that's in this film what the film is really about, is what's going on in this world. Because Peckinpah is, as with the Wild Bunch, he's doing a kind of eulogy for the end of the West, in the sense of, at a certain point, the West was a frontier for a certain amount of time, where you could escape from civilization and laws, and then eventually the landowners would come in and they would start cutting up the land into what they owned, and there would be a far less area to play for people who were outlaws or people who didn't want to be tied to what the lawmakers thought was civilization, which came with corruption, came with backhanded deals, came with all sorts of compromise you get when human beings get together. But to be honest, the film doesn't back away from the fact that these guys are outlaws. These guys are stealing stuff all the time. These guys are robbing banks. They are shooting people. These are not good people. They have to do all this stuff to survive, and their romantic notions of themselves is shown to be very flawed, and they'll ultimately, to survive, they have to turn on each other, because there's only going to be so many spaces left in the new land. So it's a eulogy for a way of life that's ending, but it's like, the film's honest enough to say this way of life probably wasn't worth a damn in the first place, because it had a lot of problems. It's just that the corrupt civilization that follows is just as full of compromises, if not more compromises. That it's just a complicated situation. So the film has romance, but also has the knowledge of what you're actually romanticising is pretty corrupt too. Which is why I love the film. Because a lot of Western films, the thing that really got me not to be interested in a lot of Westerns is the fact that they eulogise the West. But you can see just objectively what they're eulogising isn't really worth it. A lot of it really is. You're eulogising some practices which aren't very healthy. And this film actually is honest enough to say, no, what we're romantic about is something that has to pass. It's not. One of the problems that John Ford films have is it's romanticising the past to say, oh, this was great, this was a time of progress, but he kind of ignores the corruption. And like you've been bad men in it, and the plane, but he's also romanticising the sense of that a man can prove himself in this environment. He's romanticising all of that, and there's this thing about the approach of civilization is a good thing as well. And with his films, I always feel like it's a fantasy within a fantasy within a fantasy. It's not really about anything tangible what happened. It's much more about basically stock characters going through this landscape and not particularly being complicated. It got better as he went along and got more complicated as we went along, but he always kind of alienates me as a director because I always feel like he's really making a film with fantasy land. And people are taking it as reality. He's kind of one of the big directors, sort of like Hitchcock, where they get free passes in certain things because certain critics love their style and love the romanticism of the bring, or that romanticism they bring to it. But they're not willing to actually look below the surface and to say, some of this is corrupt, some of this is dodgy. So they got a free pass a lot of the time. At least by a certain generation of critics in the 50s who venerated them. Before that, they were just genre filmmakers. If you look at some of the John Ford versus Howard Hawks was much tougher about stuff. Even though he had his own sense of romanticism, but it was based on something to do with reality of the way people act. Like a bit more realistic for how scummy they can be. Peckinpah went the full weight, and you can definitely criticise him for being in love with the corruption, being in love with the degradation and pushing it forward in a way you'd see his example being brought back to the horror genre with Rob Zombie, this thing of someone who's too much in love with the awfulness of the thing they're portraying. But Peckinpah was a more intellectual director than what Zombie is. I mean, it's like... But it's something that goes through. You can see it when he does something like Straw Dog. It's like, it doesn't feel like a criticism of the genre. It doesn't feel like someone who's examining their own corruption. And something like Wild Bunch or Pat Garrett and Billy Kid, the whole idea of the self-romanticization is part of the subject. There's a sense of Peckinpah's criticising his own values, the values that he was brought up with are Western values, and he's aware that they are corrupt. But he still understands the beauty of them. So he puts himself on the table as the test subject for these films and his own behaviour in life and his own failures in life. So that's why they become personal and become something that's unique to the genre. In a way that other directors really didn't do, it became much more of an affectation. So that's why some of the Pat Garrett and Billy Kid and some of his other 1670s westerns are beautiful, because Peckinpah knows he's corrupt. Peckinpah knows he's not a good subject to follow if you want a happy life. He's talking about people who are doomed and who have created their own doom. They've actually sealed their own fate. By going so far out in life, they have created their own fate of they will fail. And that's what happened to Peckinpah in life as well. He was a drunk, he became a drug abuser, and basically wasted his potential. Just like most of his characters. So maybe I should get to the film now. So Pat Garrett and Billy Kid takes the iconic tale of Billy the Kid, which of course was one of those Penny Dreadful ideas, taking this life of this guy who became an outlaw and was shot by his best pal, and it became one of those legends, sort of like Wyatt Earp, with the sense of certain stories became legends within films and within Penny Dreadfuls that, like, oh, this amazing thing happened. Like, in the case of Wyatt Earp, it was a shootout in a town. In the case of this, it's a friend killing another friend because one of them turned from an outlaw to a sheriff. But one of the strengths of this is they could take something simple like that and create a myth out of it. But here, in this film, it's like Peckinpah looking at the myth and being aware that a lot of it's garbage. Peckinpah had written a version of the Pat Garrett and Billy Kid story in the 50s as One-Eyed Jacks, when it was from Marlon Brando. He was fired when Stanley Kubrick was brought into the film. Then Kubrick was fired by Brando, and Brando did it himself, and it was a disaster, at least commercially, and critically for a time. But he always loved the story, so when it was Rudy Wurlitzer had written a script about Pat Garrett and Billy Kid, and Peckinpah loved it, and he was like, he wanted to make this film, and he got it through MGM as they were under a management system which was not helpful to anybody who had ambitions to do good work. So the film was made, and then it was unmade by the studio until like the proper edition came out. Because the film came out and was hated straight away because they cut the guts of the film out and it was just a typical cowboy movie in the released version. In the longer versions, you get to see much more of the soul of the film, which is what I'm really going to talk about. The film is essentially about the idea of Billy the Kid and the what he was. Now, the one thing it's criticised for is that Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, both characters are played by actors, are too old for the parts, which is true, but also when you see other versions of the film, you see the logic of it. Basically, Billy the Kid was a teenager, a young man, by the end of his life. That's why he's called Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett was an older person who'd been in this outlaw life for a bit longer and who became an establishing figure. But they were both like in a world where you had to grow up very quickly. So if you look at something like Young Guns, they did the Billy Kid story, and all the actors feel way too young, even though they're probably more historically accurate for who these characters were at the time. But they grew up in a world where you weren't coddled. So a lot of the value system in the Peckinpah film feels much more legitimate, feels much more accurate to what the psychology would be of these characters. And you can only get that by age. There's no way to force an actor to grow up quicker than they can. So it's like you have to cheat to get the actual essential qualities out that you need for this part. And even Kristofferson was a very young actor because he was a musician, and even he said he thought he wasn't mature as an actor at all at the time, and he thought he wished he could go back and do it again because he thought he could do a much better job of what he knows. But the fact that he is rough and very kind of focused an actor actually becomes part of the thing that makes it work, is the fact that this is a guy going on instinct mostly, and he doesn't really know why he's doing certain things, but he knows what his values are, but he also has a charm to him. But he's someone people put their own values onto rather than someone who inhabits all those values himself. He's an unformed person because he's young. The person who's really formed is Pat Garrett, played by James Coburn, who in most of these films is either a betrayer figure or someone who's not that, well developed. In this one, it's about him. It's about the idea that he's had to move from being an outlaw to being a sheriff, and he has to hunt down people who were his friends before. It's the only way to survive because the world's moving on. So he's going to do it. He's like, I'm going to do this to survive. But it's about the cost of that. That's the film's about, the cost of moving away from what was your values and killing your friends and knowing the downfall of your friends, knowing where they're weak, knowing where they can be prodded, where you can twist a knife in. where you can cheat to get at them, and how you can manipulate them, and there's a sense that everybody knows what's going on. Everybody's aware of the manipulations and aware of the situations, and it's like people blame him for it, but they also don't blame him for it because it's like, oh, he made the jump quicker than everyone else did, or he can make that jump and we couldn't. And a lot of the people are getting hunted down. They know they're doomed. They know that the life they had is limited. And a lot of them will say, just go to Mexico where you're not wanted and just grow a life there. And they won't do it. And it's like, well, what do you expect was going to happen? Someone's going to come and get you. And the villains hired someone who knew how to do it, which is Pat Garret. And he is the soul of the film, essentially. But usually in films where he's the soul of the film, they try and make them out to be a tragic figure because of their virtues. No, Pat Garrett's a tragic figure because he knows what it costs. He knows the cost of things, and he knows he's the villain. He knows he cannot escape by saying, oh, I was forced to do it. No, he did it by himself. He knows he's destroying part of his soul doing it. And that's the story. That's the story of this guy losing a lot of his soul to survive and to live in a world which is far more compromised. And of course, Peckinpah shows at the beginning of the film Garret being killed years later. And you realise that it was all for nothing. He lived longer, he got some money, but he wasn't very happy, and he ended up being killed by other ruffians, and it's just a cycle. Like, you're the killer one day, and then the next other day you're the victim. It's just a cycle of the violence of this world. And Peckinpah's looking at the world where he looks into who the characters are and what life means to them, but he also knows to the outside, to the other person killing you, doesn't mean anything. It's just you're an objective. But he understands the costs of the people who die. And it is this melancholy feel of the wasted lives and the sense of doom. But he's smart enough to know that these wasted lives, they were wasted by the people who've lived in them. No enforcement do have this stuff. I mean, Billy the Kid is a psychopath. He has a self-romanticized view. He is not mature at all. He does not understand anything beyond survival and beyond the basic romantic values of him and his friends. He understands he's very street smart. He understands the later stuff. He doesn't understand the morality of anything. Pat Garret does, but he knows it's a bunch of nonsense. He knows it's hypocritical nonsense, really, because they're not dealing with a world where people understand these values, and the people who are espousing the values are just as corrupt, or if more corrupt than the outlaws that get hunted down. But it doesn't mean the outlaws shouldn't be hunted down. It's just that the level above them is even more corrupt. So it becomes this story about how do you survive in a world where everything's corrupt, where the romanticized notion of it is this is a way you can be free, and the reality is, by being free, you're open to being murdered by your friend, you're open to be raped, you're open to be just massacred, you and your family massacred by a bunch of other psychos. It's not a freedom of no consequences, it's a freedom of fear most of the time, where you have to go in a gang somewhere just to survive. It's not a particularly great freedom. But the film is just wonderful about the details of how these people all slowly get hunted down. Because it is a story of, it starts off, Billy the Kid is caught, then he escapes, and then it's this final run before his death. And hunting him down means that a lot of people who he was in contact with, other people do have to go and question, or go and just basically hunt down to prod Billy. So his escape, if he had just died, everyone else would have survived. They've just been left alone, and it's like, we don't care about you as much. But instead, they're all getting hunted down, and lots of people die. And there's a great scene with Slim Pickens where he has to go and help Pat Garret attack Elkie Jones's gang, and he gets shot in the gut. And it's the moment where Dylan wrote Knocking on Heaven's Door for, which is a great song. And this sense of just this doom, this end of a life, is just beautiful. And it just goes through the whole film, and that's what the studio was afraid of, because the studio wanted this based a cowboy movie, and what it was getting was a meditation on how this whole genre was corrupt, and how everyone in it is corrupt, and how even your heroes aren't your heroes. Like, it pretty much makes you understand that Billy the Kid was not worth saving. He's a very destructive force. He has no idea how to live beyond his environment. And for the sake of progress, he has to go. He just does not have the ability to survive the new world. But it still has a sadness about it. It still has a sense of Pat Garrett destroying himself to do it. And it's the sense of what is progress and the actual lives lost for progress. Which you see even nowadays. I mean, the things people do for what they view as progress, you know, ends in wars where thousands of people die all the time. We just look at the news and it's always going on. And the people who make those decisions are very corrupt. So it's about life, and it's about our areas of corruption and the way that everyone's lives are more complicated and less idealistic than what we'd like to think. I mean, this still doesn't mean it's not a tragedy when horrible things happen to people. It's just about looking at the kind of the situation with sadness, but also objectivity, which is what the film really does. Now, you could criticise the film for being a bit long. It is a little bit long, but if you love the film, it doesn't matter. If you love the mood of it, it does not matter that it's a tad long. Because every film has a flaw, even if you want to admit it or not. And this one has a flaw, but it's just a bit long. But I don't know where you cut. I just think that the story lends itself to being a bit too long. It's just, that's the story. There's so many details you need to get in. And there's lots of great character actors that get great scenes. Like R.G. Armstrong as the guy with all these pennies and shotgun. He's great. He's a religious nut. You've got Jack Elam as another guy in the West who's played both sides for years and who's hired by Pat Garrett. He has a competition with Billy the Kid when they face off against each other, and then basically it's a duel where the person who cheats most is the one who wins. You have things like that suggesting that the reality of the West is a lot grubbier than what you think. And there's scenes with Pat Garrett where he's basically brutalising his old friends. He knows all their weaknesses, he knows how to break them, and he's doing horrible things to them, and it's just a sense of this corrupt era ending and people just destroying one another. So it's just a beautiful film, and you need all of those details to get the point across of both the beauty and the horrors of this era, which I think Peckinpah was about. And I think once he lost the Western, he kind of lost part of his soul, because there wasn't much else to make films about. I mean, he tried, but most of the other films he made after this didn't have the same soul, because his heart was in that era. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you actually buy this. It is really worth it. The transfer's terrific. You get nice extras. There's a documentary about the making of the film, which is taken from lots of interviews from the past you may have seen, but it just puts it all together as what happened in the film. And you've got some commentaries, but mostly you have different cuts of the film so you can see what the changes were, what the differences was. So yeah, definitely, I would definitely highly recommend this film and this edition. So I hope you enjoyed this video. That's me for now. See you later. Bye.